Dokja carried Gil-young on his back, walking back toward his companions, Hyun-sung and Sanga. His steps were steady despite the weight, his mind still processing what had just happened. Above him, Bi-hyung watched closely, his frustration evident. The dokkaebi couldn't help but express his exasperation, making it clear that Dokja's actions had nearly given him a heart attack. As Dokja continued walking, he shifted his focus to a more pressing concern. He inquired if Bi-hyung had filtered the chat, aware that he might have revealed too much earlier. Bi-hyung confirmed that he had taken care of it, explaining that he had no intention of ruining his own channel. Any information too dangerous had been automatically filtered out. Dokja reflected on this, realizing an important detail. The constellations, despite their immense wealth and power, were not all-knowing. There were limits to the information they could access. If his assumption was correct, then the words he had spoken earlier would have been filtered before reaching the constellations, ensuring that they didn't perceive it as too severe. This was how the novel had initially concealed the fact that Jung-hyuk Yu was a regressor. Bi-hyung reassured him, stating that the constellations hadn't heard much. However, the revelation that even he himself had been unable to hear the filtered information unsettled Dokja. Something felt strange. If even a dokkaebi couldn't access certain information, did that mean there were details hidden even from them? The thought led him to a deeper suspicion. Was this a restriction imposed by feasibility itself? Bi-hyung mentioned that the chat had been flooded with messages, so he had taken the liberty of blocking out some of them at his own discretion. Dokja acknowledged his effort, instructing him to only show messages from the highest paying constellations. Bi-hyung scoffed at the request, questioning whether he was supposed to act as Dokja's manager. Despite his complaints, he followed through with the request. A few messages appeared before Dokja's eyes. Among them, certain constellations who sought the truth had taken an interest in him. One name stood out. The constellation known as the Secretive Plotter was intrigued by his presence. Hyewon stepped forward and offered to carry Gil-young for a while. Dokja, feeling the strain in his body, gratefully accepted. Hyewon carefully took Gil-young from Dokja's back and adjusted his weight onto her own. Watching her, Dokja hesitated for a moment before calling her name. Hyewon turned to look at him, waiting for him to speak. He asked if she had heard anything he had said earlier. She considered his question before responding, revealing that she had caught parts of his word. Dokja smiled inwardly, realizing something important. He had assumed she was too far away to hear anything, but it seemed that chat filters did not work between humans. Hyewon then fixed her gaze on him and asked who he really was. Dokja did not hesitate. He admitted that he knew the future, partially. Hyewon's reaction was uncertain. She asked if Sanga or Hyun-sung were aware of this. Dokja told her they did not know yet. A thought crossed Hyewon's mind, and she voiced it without hesitation. She asked if he intended to kill her now that she had learned something significant. Dokja was taken aback by the question, confused by the sudden shift in her tone. Hyewon explained her reasoning, stating that people in such situations often silenced those who knew too much. Dokja dismissed the idea immediately, stating that if he had such intentions, he would have acted long ago. That was not his goal. Instead, he revealed something far more important. The scenario ahead would be even more dangerous. Their lives would be at risk, and they might be forced to lose something precious. Hyewon listened carefully, waiting for him to continue. Dokja finally spoke the words that had been on his mind. He wanted her by his side, just as before. He was asking her to be his companion. Moments later, they arrived at the station. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Tension filled the air, and all eyes turned toward them. Gong Pildu, battered and bruised, stood among the survivors, his rage barely contained. He shouted, demanding to know where Dokja was. His voice carried frustration, his anger fueled by whatever had transpired in his absence. Hyun-sung, trying to maintain order, attempted to calm the situation, urging everyone to control themselves. But Pildu's injuries and anger made it clear. He was not ready to listen. He lashed out, questioning if Hyun-sung was serious after everything that had happened. Before the situation could escalate further, Dokja called out, his voice cutting through the tension as he called for Hyun-sung and Sanga. Hyun-sung's face lit up with relief as he recognized Dokja, but Pildu turned toward him immediately, his fury intensifying. He demanded to know where Dokja had been all this time, his frustration spilling over. Dokja took a moment to assess the situation. Pildu had grown considerably stronger, his presence more imposing than before. Despite the hostility, Dokja found himself pleased by the sight. Pildu's strength would be valuable in the coming challenges. Just then, a notification flashed across everyone's vision. The announcement was clear. The fourth main scenario would begin in 5 minutes. Pildu clenched his teeth, cursing under his breath. The sudden news only added to his frustration. Dokja, unfazed, merely shrugged. In that moment, Bi-hyung's laughter echoed through the air, breaking the tension. His mischievous voice rang out as he greeted everyone, mocking their expressions. He claimed he could tell how great they had been doing just from their faces. One of Pildu's Pildu's men, already on edge, demanded to know what was coming next. Bi-hyung wasted no time, announcing that he was there to explain the fourth main scenario. He urged everyone to calm down and listen, teasing that they would love what he was about to reveal. Dokja, watching the scene unfold, felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. Managing Chungmuro alone had been difficult enough. Now, with the new scenario involving other stations, there was no telling how chaotic things would become. Bi-hyung's voice echoed through the station, capturing everyone's attention. He explained that in order to proceed with the scenario, there was a prerequisite mission that had to be completed first. Too many people in one place would lead to chaos, so a leader was needed, someone to take command of Chungmuro. The decision was clear. The station required a leader, and the time had come to elect one. A notification rang out, marking the arrival of a new sub-scenario. The message appeared in everyone's vision, detailing the objective. The game that was about to unfold was merely a prelude, a warm-up before the real challenge began. The sub-scenario was titled Leader Election. The conditions for victory were simple. Take possession of the white flag positioned at the center of the platform. The one who held the flag would be granted absolute authority over the station. The moment the announcement was made, Gong Pildu sprang into action. Without hesitation, he dashed forward, pushing past those in his way. His thoughts were clear. If he could claim the flag and become the leader, he would no longer have to take orders from anyone. Just as he neared the flag, a commanding voice cut through the chaos. The order was swift and absolute, forcing Pildu to the ground in an instant. A notification followed, confirming that Pildu had been restrained under the authority granted by a contract. Dokja stepped over Pildu without hesitation, his movements smooth and precise. Pildu groaned in frustration, unable to resist. Without missing a beat, Dokja reached for the flag, taking it with ease. His expression was unreadable, but his actions spoke volumes. His tone was almost playful as he acknowledged Pildu beneath him, as if he hadn't noticed him at all. A new message appeared. The system recognized Dokja as the one who had taken the white flag from the flagpole. With that, he was granted the right to walk the king's path. Dokja felt the change immediately. Power surged through him, a sensation unlike anything before. Another notification followed, outlining the rules. If no one claimed the flag within the next 5 minutes, Chungmuro Station would remain under his command. If the flag's ownership changed, a new leader would be elected, and the 5-minute countdown would reset. Pildu groaned in frustration, still unable to move. Dokja considered the situation carefully. In the original timeline, this flag had belonged to Junghyuk in his third regression, but Junghyuk was already strong enough without it. Gong Pildu's voice roared across the platform, filled with urgency and frustration. He ordered his men to take the flag, reminding them that they had 5 minutes to strip it from Dokja's hands. Without hesitation, the crowd surged forward as one, rushing toward Dokja. In response, Dokja swiftly tossed a shield toward Hyunsung. Hyunsung caught it mid-air, momentarily confused as he examined the new shield in his hands. It was different from the one he had before. A realization dawned on him. This was a gift. Excitement flashed in Hyunsung's eyes as he understood Dokja's unspoken command. Without wasting another second, he raised the shield and activated his special skill, Area Defense. A powerful barrier expanded outward, stopping Pildu's gang members in their tracks. Their advance came to a sudden halt, confusion spreading among them as they found themselves unable to reach Dokja. Pildu, watching in growing frustration, gritted his teeth. He cursed under his breath before activating his Stigma, militarized zone. Instantly, multiple turrets materialized around the battlefield, their barrels locking onto their targets. The machines adjusted their aim, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Before the attack could begin, Dokja's voice cut through the tension. The authority to command, granted by the contract, took effect once more. Pildu was thrown to the ground, unable to resist. Dokja's command was absolute. He ordered Pildu to remain where he was, and to deactivate his turrets. The mechanical weapons, once primed for destruction, flickered out of existence. Dokja took note of how much stronger Pildu had become. Even so, it was still not enough. Pildu struggled, attempting to push himself up, but the system's restrictions held him down. Desperation seeped into his voice as he demanded to be released, his curses growing louder. Dokja, unimpressed, silenced him with another command. For the next 30 minutes, Pildu would be unable to speak. A muffled groan of protest escaped him, but it was useless. Now that the distractions had been dealt with, Dokja turned his attention to the rest of the crowd. The station was at a turning point. Inwardly, Dokja assessed the numbers. 29 people remained. 20 of them belonged to the Landlord Coalition, while only 9 stood apart, including his own group. It was not an overwhelming number, but it was manageable. Controlling too many would have been troublesome. It was time to build alliances. Dokja addressed the survivors with a simple choice. They could leave Chungmuro and seek their fortune elsewhere, or they could stay under his command. The decision was theirs to make. Dokja glanced at Hee-won, his thoughts firm. From now on, he could only keep those he truly trusted by his side. He recalled their previous conversation the moment he had laid out his proposal. Back then, he had asked Heewon to be his companion. Heewon had hesitated before responding, questioning whether he had never considered her a companion before that moment. Dokja had been clear. It was the opposite. He had always thought of her as one, but that did not mean she had felt the same. If it was too much for her, she could think of it as a simple deal. He needed her strength now, and in return, the information he held would benefit her as well. What truly mattered was maintaining this partnership through the coming trials. Heewon had taken in his words before posing a question of her own. She had wanted to know what she was doing in the future he spoke of. Dokja had hesitated. Then he had told her the truth. She did not exist in the future he knew. Confusion had flickered across Heewon's face. Dokja had not explained further. Instead, he had told her that this was why she needed to grow stronger, more than anyone. In his mind, he had already reached a conclusion. Heewon was a variable, an existence he had unknowingly created, one that had not been in the original story. Another chance to choose a supporting constellation would come after this scenario. If Heewon could form a strong connection, she would play a crucial role in shaping future events. She would be especially valuable against unknown enemies, those outside his knowledge, like the prophets. The weight of his words had pressed on her. It was too much to take in all at once. She had told him she would think about it. Now in the present, the same uncertainty filled the crowd before him. The survivors murmured among themselves, struggling to grasp the situation. The decision had come too suddenly. Dokja did not give them time to waver. He demanded an answer. They could stay or they could leave. There was no in between. If they chose to stay, they would follow his orders. If they left, he would not stop them. The response was immediate. One of them questioned his authority. Another scoffed, accusing him of trying to rule over them like a king. Dokja remained unmoved. He did not sugarcoat his words. He would not pretend to be anything he was not. But unlike the so-called leaders before him, he had no intention of demanding payment for survival. The remaining survivors hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They wanted reassurance, a promise of protection if they chose to follow Dokja. Dokja made it clear. He could guarantee safety from external threats, but he would not interfere in conflicts that arose within the group. They would have to handle those matters themselves. Hearing this, some wavered, but others remained firm in their decision. There was no reason to listen further. Their minds were made up. They turned away, calling for Pildu to follow, but Dokja stopped them. Pildu would not be leaving with them. Pildu now belonged to him. The atmosphere shifted. At that moment, Bihyung reappeared, his presence signaling something significant. The dokkaebi observed the scene with amusement, acknowledging Dokja's new role. Dokja had not expected them to leave so easily. 5 of them had chosen to walk away, but it was their choice, and they should be able to survive on their own. Now his focus was on those who remained. With a slight smirk, he welcomed them. The sub-scenario was now complete. Dokja had become the true leader of Chungmuro Station. The group now consisted of 24 people, with only 5 having departed. One of the remaining survivors stepped forward, bowing his head in remorse. He acknowledged their past actions against Dokja and pleaded for forgiveness, but Dokja remained firm. He was not the one they should be seeking forgiveness from. A system message followed, declaring that Dokja had been granted full authority over the Chungmuro group due to the power of the white flag. With this, he had the ability to punish any member who defied him. However, his current fame was insufficient for him to be recognized as a king. Dokja absorbed this information, his thoughts lingering on the word. A king? Byung's excitement grew. The small dokkaebi was eager to move forward. Without hesitation, he snapped his fingers, and in that instant, the 4th main scenario was activated. Heewon studied the new objective, analyzing its conditions. They had to defend their flag while also planting their own at the enemy's flagpole. Dokja confirmed her understanding. Their target was now set, Changsan Station. It was clear what needed to be done. The scenario had begun. Dokja chuckled, his reaction drawing the attention of Heewon. She couldn't help but wonder, why had the dokkaebi asked that question if he already knew the answer? Senga's thoughts drifted to the scenario ahead. There was uncertainty in her voice as she questioned whether they would have to fight against other people once again. Hyun-sung carefully examined the scenario's description. It stated that once their flag was planted into the enemy's flagpole, the opposing group would fall under their control. There was a possibility that no lives would have to be taken. Senga's eyes lit up with hope. Nowhere in the instructions did it say that the losers would be killed. If they could assimilate the opposing group into their own, then perhaps. Hyun-sung agreed. It seemed possible to complete the scenario without unnecessary bloodshed, but Dokja knew better. There was no such thing as a deathless scenario. This 4th scenario would claim more casualties than any that had come before it. Heewon shifted the discussion back to strategy. Their first priority was to locate Changsan Station. Hyun-sung provided the information. Changsan Station was on line 6. If they moved through the tunnels, they could pass through Yaksu and one of the transfer stations along the way. way. To execute their plan efficiently, they would need to split the group. Some would stay behind for guard duty, while the others would go scouting. As the group exchanged opinions and planned their next moves, system notifications appeared. The activation of the scenario had disabled Chungmuro Station's safety borders. Movement to other stations was now unrestricted. While the others continued their discussion, Dokja stepped away and approached Gong Pildu. He knew Pildu resented him, but that didn't matter. The man needed to adapt to reality. He was no longer a landlord. Dokja understood the reason behind Pildu's obsession with land ownership, but survival required knowing where to draw the line. Pildu would be in charge of guarding the station. Pildu's resistance was immediate. He saw no reason to follow orders. Dokja, however, had no intention of forcing him. Instead, he made it clear. Obedience would be rewarded. If Pildu did as he was told, he would gain something valuable in return. But more than that, Dokja reminded him of what truly mattered. Pildu's family had been separated from him. If he wanted to survive long enough to reunite with them, he needed to make the right choice. Gong Pildu's eyes widened in shock at Dokja's words. His reaction was immediate. Disbelief and suspicion flickered across his face. Before he could respond, a sudden noise echoed through the tunnel. A loud bang, followed by the blaring sound of a horn, cut through the air. Headlights illuminated the railway tracks of Line 4, casting long shadows in the darkness. Something was approaching Chungmuro Station. Dokja's mind raced. Could it be an invasion? Had it already begun, even though the scenario had only just started? In the distance, the headlights abruptly turned off, leaving only voices in the dark. A group of people emerged, their conversation carrying through the still air. They spoke casually, as if they had been waiting for this moment. One of them mentioned that Chungmuro had finally opened. Another complained about the delay, frustrated by the time it had taken. Someone in the group urged caution, warning that their voices might be heard. They reminded the others that scenarios could differ between stations, an important detail that could change everything. Dokja stepped forward, his blade gleaming under the dim station lights. He raised it, his stance unwavering. With a firm command, he ordered the newcomers to stop where they were, lower their weapons, and approach slowly. At the sight of Dokja's blade, the group hesitated. Their movements halted as tension filled the space between them. One of them tried to ease the situation, raising his hands in a placating gesture. His voice carried a nervous chuckle as he admitted that Dokja's aggression had nearly scared him to the point of losing control. There was no need for such hostility, he insisted. They weren't there to start a fight. Dokja remained cautious. If not to fight, then why had they come? A man stepped forward, introducing himself. His name was Kang Ilhun, and he held the position of vice leader of the Dongdaemun group. Dokja's mind immediately worked through the implications. Ilhun, was that a familiar name? He tried to recall if this man had appeared in the novel. His instincts screamed that something was off. This situation felt too suspicious, too unexpected. Could this be one of the unpredictable variables he had feared? Without hesitation, Dokja activated his skill and checked Ilhun's character profile. The result confirmed his suspicion. Ilhun was supported by the constellation easygoing gossiper. His personal attribute was rumor expert. Dokja analyzed Ilhun carefully. The man carried the title rumor expert, a dangerous trait to appear this early in the scenario. It felt unnatural, as if an unexpected element had entered the flow of events. Ilhun shifted his attention fully to Dokja, his expression composed but watchful. Without hesitation, he asked for Dokja's name. Dokja responded, introducing himself as Dokja. Ilhun's lips curled into a smile. His gaze flickered to the flag in Dokja's possession, and he quickly deduced that Dokja must be the leader of the group. Something about Ilhun's reaction felt off. Dokja sensed a brief moment of hesitation, a subtle change in the man's demeanor, but it vanished just as quickly as it appeared. Refusing to waste time, Dokja pressed him for answers. If he was done assessing the situation, then he should state his reason for coming. Ilhun chuckled lightly before apologizing, claiming that he had only been ensuring their safety. He reiterated that they were not there to fight. Instead, they had come with an offer. Dokja remained skeptical. There was no reason to trust them so easily. He questioned how they were supposed to believe anything Ilhun said. Ilhun provided a logical response. If the group had intended to attack, their leader would have accompanied them. Only the leader had the authority to plant the flag, and yet none of them carried one. Dokja acknowledged the validity of that statement. A quick glance confirmed that none of the newcomers held a flag. However, something about the situation still made him uneasy. Without letting his guard down, Dokja asked what kind of offer they had come to make. Ilhun did not hesitate. He declared that they were proposing an alliance. A murmur spread through the group. Uncertainty filled the air as the others reacted to the unexpected proposal. Some questioned whether this was a good idea, their voices betraying their doubt. Hyunsung was the first to speak against it. He voiced his opposition firmly, making it clear that he did not trust them. Something about Ilhun's group felt wrong. Ilhun, unfazed by the distrust, calmly explained his reasoning. Chungmuro was not their target station. If they had truly intended to take it over, they would have arrived in full force. The best time to strike would have been right after the station's barricades barriers were lifted, yet they had come with only a few members, which proved that an attack was not their goal. Dokja, unwilling to drop his caution, proposed a counterpoint. If their group's target was Dongdaemun Station, then what would happen if Chungmuro decided to make a move against them instead? Ilhun's response was immediate. There was no need for concern. His group already knew which station was coming after them. Dokja understood the intention behind Ilhun's proposal. Their targets were different, and because of that, Ilhun wanted both groups to work together. Ilhun confirmed this and revealed another piece of crucial information. The fourth scenario had already been in progress for 2 days. Since Chungmuro had only just opened, they had far less knowledge compared to those who had already started. Dokja recalled that in the original novel, Chungmuro had indeed been delayed. That meant Ilhun's group had more information than they did. Ilhun continued, hinting at a secret that could prove useful. He claimed they had a sure win tactic for the fourth scenario, something that would make an alliance with them worthwhile. However, Dokja was not willing to accept so easily. He stated that they would decide only after meeting the leader of Ilhun's group. Ilhun's expression shifted slightly, but he did not argue. Dokja asked for the leader's whereabouts. Ilhun offered to lead them to Dongdaemun, where their leader was waiting. Without hesitation, Dokja agreed. Before they could leave, Senga spoke up. She had a question. Ilhun turned to her, addressing her politely. Senga questioned why they had come to Chungmuro specifically. If they had started from Dongdaemun, there were many other stations nearby that they could have allied with. Ilhun responded with a casual laugh before explaining. Other stations had already formed alliances, but Chungmuro, having just opened, was still unaligned. That made it the best option for them. However, he avoided giving further details, implying that more information would only be shared once an alliance was agreed upon. With that, Dokja turned to Gilyong and instructed him to stay behind and rest. He also told Gong Pildu to take care of the boy while they were gone. Dokja, Senga, Hyunsung, and Heewon took their positions on the back seats of the motorcycles that Ilhun's group had arrived on. Engines roared to life, and the bikes began moving. As they rode, Dokja spoke again. He called out to Ilhun. Ilhun acknowledged him, asking what it was. Dokja then brought up a crucial detail. He questioned whether any of the other groups had mentioned anything about Chungmuro. Ilhun seemed confused by the question and asked for clarification. Dokja did not hesitate. He specifically asked if anyone had warned them about a dangerous man named Junghyuk at that station. Ilhun let out a light laugh, feigning ignorance. He claimed not to understand what Dokja was referring to. Just then, Dokja and his party members felt something was off. At Dokja's signal, the entire party leaped from the motorcycles at the same time. Senga reacted instantly, activating binding thread. The threads wrapped around the 4 motorcycles, pulling them together in a tangled mess. A loud crash echoed through the tunnel as the bikes collided. Screams filled the air as the Dongdaemun members were thrown to the ground from the impact. Meanwhile, Dokja's party hung safely in the air, suspended by the thread that was securely fastened to the ceiling. Ilhun, recovering from the sudden crash, shouted in frustration. Dokja, looking down at him, remained unfazed. He had anticipated this outcome from the start. Before arriving, Dokja had already devised a plan. If they acted as though they were interested in the alliance and followed the group, they could leave as soon as things seemed suspicious. Now, in the present, he faced Ilhun without hesitation. The ambush was obvious from the start. If they truly wanted to surprise their opponents, they should have done a better job hiding. Ilhun realized the situation had turned against him and cursed under his breath before giving a desperate order. At his command, figures hidden throughout the tunnel emerged, charging toward Dokja's group. Their target was clear, the flag, but Dokja had been prepared. At that moment, Heewon activated Judgment Time. The absolute good constellations approved its use, and her sword shone brightly in the darkness. A crimson light cut through the tunnel. The sharp blade tore through the enemies without resistance, their bodies falling one after another. Heewon barely broke a sweat as she looked around, surprised. Compared to her previous battle at the cinema, these opponents were nothing. Meanwhile, Dokja activated Purest Sword Force. His movements were swift and precise. In a matter of moments, Ilhun was completely subdued. Ilhun shouted Dokja's name, struggling against the force holding him down, but Dokja's attention was already elsewhere. Yunsung's urgent voice rang out from behind. Dokja turned toward Chungmuro and immediately spotted the problem. The station was in chaos. They had been ambushed the moment they left. Gong Pildu's voice echoed in anger as he fought back against the unknown attackers. Without hesitation, Dokja left Ilhun to be tied up by Senga. His priority was clear. He needed to return turned to Chungmuro at once. Dokja quickly analyzed the situation. The direction the attackers had come from made it clear. They were from the Myeongdong group. It seemed they had joined forces with Dongdaemun. The battle had already erupted on the platform. The enemy forces wielded the same type of weapons that Kim Nam-woon had once used. Among them, one figure stood out the most, a man with a red flag tied around his head like a bandana. He was shouting orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. His focus was on securing the flagpole. If he could plant the red flag, the fight would be over. This man was Hyuntae Kim, the leader of Myeongdong. He had activated the effect of the red flag, strengthening his group. At his command, the fighters roared and charged, pushing forward in an attempt to seize the flagpole. Dokja analyzed the situation. The color of a flag determined the strength of its holder. The ranking started from white and progressed through red, navy, brown, purple, and finally, black. The stronger the color, the greater the buff it provided. Since Myeongdong had a red flag, it meant they had already conquered another station or killed another station's leader to take their flag. Their battle instincts were sharp, but their skills were still far from what was needed to claim Chungmuro. Gong Pildu, filled with rage, wasted no time. Without hesitation, he activated his Stigma, Militarized Zone level 6. The property of his skill was triggered and 8 mini-turrets emerged at once, instantly opening fire on the Myeongdong fighters rushing toward the flagpole. A storm of bullets tore through the battlefield. Screams erupted as bodies were shredded by the relentless barrage. Flesh and blood scattered through the air. The sheer destructive power of Gong Pildu's ability was overwhelming. The Myeongdong survivors, realizing the danger, quickly huddled together in a tight defensive formation, but it was useless. The turrets of the level 6 militarized zone were too powerful for them to withstand. Explosions echoed throughout the station as shell after shell rained down. The battlefield was in ruins. Gong Pildu was terrifying as an enemy, but as an ally, he was an unstoppable force. Kim, the leader of Myeongdong, panicked. The situation was not in the information he had received. He gave the order to retreat, but there was nowhere left for his group to run. Dokja blocked their escape. With Unbroken Faith activated, the ether property of his weapon transformed into fire. The flames surged forth, creating a burning wall that sealed off any possible exit. The trapped fighters hesitated, their movements faltering for just a moment, but in battle, hesitation meant death. Gong Pildu took advantage of their confusion. The mini turrets roared to life again, spitting out a relentless storm of bullets. The enemy fighters screamed as they fell one by one. The Myeongdong representative was struck in the head by a magic bullet, and the red flag slipped from his grasp. Gong Pildu's eyes gleamed as he spotted the fallen flag. He moved forward, fully intending to claim it for himself, but Dokja intervened, his presence stopping Pildu in his track. Frustrated, Gong Pildu turned away, unwilling to argue. Dokja reached down and picked up the flag. At that moment, a system message flickered before his eyes. He had obtained the flag of the Myeongdong group. His own white flag absorbed the accumulated achievements of the red flag. The transformation was instant. His white flag evolved into a red flag. With this, he had taken another step toward the king's path. Dokja understood the significance of the flag. Once a flag reached the red tier, it did not just enhance the leader's stats, it strengthened every member of the group. This was the reason behind the ongoing war between the stations. Every faction sought to seize and upgrade their flags, growing stronger with each battle. The leaders of every station were locked in a brutal struggle for dominance. Dokja turned to Gong Pildu, questioning the sheer scale of the slaughter. There were no survivors. Gong Pildu remained firm in his stance. Holding back was not an option in a battle where enemies charged with the intent to kill. Dokja knew there was no use pressing further. The ones who had attacked Chungmuro must have had prior knowledge about this place. Ilhun's reaction earlier made it clear. He had not expected Dokja to be the leader here, yet they had attacked without hesitation. This could only mean one thing. Someone had given them information in advance. Dokja's gaze remained fixed on Ilhun, who was tightly bound by Senga's binding thread. Hyunsung stood guard beside him, ensuring there was no chance of escape. Ilhun's body trembled as he struggled against the restraints, but there was no way out. His fate depended entirely on the people around him. Hyewon observed the scene with a sharp gaze. The constellations had already judged Ilhun and his group as evil. Considering the situation, she suggested extracting information through torture. Dokja, however, dismissed the idea. It would take too much effort. A simpler approach would be to execute them if they refused to talk. Without hesitation, he drew his sword. The gleaming blade caught the light as he stepped closer to Ilhun. Ilhun flinched at the sight of the weapon. His breathing grew uneven as he looked up at Dokja. Dokja made his intentions clear. He would count to 3. If no useful information was given before then, Ilhun would die. To emphasize his threat, Dokja activated Purest Sword Force and stabbed the sword into the ground. The sharp energy spread from the blade, cutting into the floor. The force of the attack sent fragments of debris flying toward Ilhun's face. The ether blade advanced slowly, slowly, its deadly edge inching closer to his eyes. Il-hun could not hold out. Before Dokja's countdown was complete, he broke. Through panicked gasps, he revealed what he knew. At Dongmyo, there were people who had given them information about Chungmuro. These individuals called themselves the Prophets. Dokja immediately sensed that something was wrong. Il-hun's expression twisted unnaturally, his eyes rolling back, his tongue slackened, hanging from his mouth like a man already dead. A sinking feeling spread through Dokja. Without wasting a second, he gave an order to Senga. She swiftly tightened the binding thread around Il-hun's mouth, sealing it shut just in time. Il-hun's body convulsed as he choked, his movements violent before gradually weakening. Dokja analyzed the situation. Their enemies were thorough. They had placed hypnotic triggers to prevent information from leaking. If Il-hun had managed to finish his words, he would have died on the spot, but this also meant there was a flaw in their method. Hypnosis only worked on someone they had met in person. Since they had Il-hun alive, he could still lead them directly to one of the prophets. Dokja did not hesitate. Before beginning the full search, he made his way to the roof of the theater. The air was still, the tension from earlier lingering around them. Ji-hye stood nearby, her gaze shifting toward the entrance as if expecting someone to arrive. Dokja glanced at her before asking about the situation. Jung-hyuk-yu was still unconscious, his condition unchanged. Ji-hye turned to him, her expression questioning. She asked about what had happened downstairs. Dokja reassured her. There was no need for concern. She should rest instead of worrying about the situation below. However, Ji-hye hesitated. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She finally voiced what was troubling her master's condition. Dokja's response was calm. Jung-hyuk would recover, but he would likely be shaken. The events had affected him more than she expected. Dokja explained further. Despite Jung-hyuk's strength, he was not as mentally prepared as she might believe. A period of rest would help him regain his composure. Until then, she needed to watch over him. Ji-hye studied Dokja for a moment before commenting on how well he seemed to know Jung-hyuk. Dokja simply stated the truth. He understood Jung-hyuk better than anyone in the world. Without waiting for her response, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He carefully wrote a series of notes, his strokes quick and precise. Once he finished, he handed the paper to Ji-hye. She took it without question. Dokja instructed her not to read it. The note was meant for Jung-hyuk when he regained consciousness. Ji-hye agreed, though Dokja already knew the outcome. She would likely read it out of curiosity. However, the message contained words that only Jung-hyuk would understand. Even if she read it, its meaning would be lost on her. As Dokja pondered this, Ji-hye hesitated once again. A question had been weighing on her mind. She brought up what had happened earlier that morning. The interaction between Dokja and Jung-hyuk-yu had not gone unnoticed. Dokja's thoughts raced. Had she overheard them as well? He had been careless, speaking without considering who might be nearby. For now, the best course of action was to feign ignorance. Ji-hye hesitated before speaking, her words uncertain. She was trying to bring up something, but she struggled to say it directly. Dokja glanced at her, waiting. When she finally spoke, her words were vague, as if she expected him to understand without explanation. He questioned her, pressing for clarification, but instead of answering directly, she mimicked his past words in an exaggerated manner, twisting them into something completely different. She recalled the promises he had made, the words of encouragement he had spoken before. Her voice grew louder as she repeated the phrases, distorting them further. She mentioned staying by his side, never losing hope, and even spoke of a child, making it sound like he and Jung-hyuk-yu had taken in a child together. Dokja was speechless. None of what she said was accurate. Inwardly, he was baffled by how she had managed to misinterpret his words so thoroughly. Ji-hye continued, her expression playful yet serious. She speculated about the nature of his relationship with Jung-hyuk-yu, making assumptions without hesitation. She even promised to deliver what she now called a love letter. Dokja's frustration grew. This was beyond absurd. At that moment, messages flickered in his vision. The constellations reacted strongly to what had been censored from their view. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband acknowledged him with understanding. The constellation Demonic Judge of Fire found amusement in the situation. Meanwhile, the constellation Secretive Plotter was utterly shocked. Dokja could barely contain his irritation. The reactions of the constellations only added to the absurdity of the moment. Not wanting to deal with it any longer, he turned and hurried through the theater, putting distance between himself and Ji-hye. But she called after him, her curiosity still not satisfied. She questioned him about the child, genuinely wondering if they had adopted one. Dokja gave a brief response, telling her to ask Jung-hyuk-yu when he woke up, before making his way downstairs. Once he reached the lower levels of the theater, he took out his phone and opened the novel. He needed answers. As he read, his mind processed the information. In all the time he had spent reading Ways of Survival, he had never encountered a group known as the Prophets. That meant only two possibilities existed. The first was that an unknown variable had caused a new prophet to appear, someone different from Anna Croft, who was supposed to be the only one. The second, and more likely possibility, was that there was another reader like him, someone who had also read Ways of Survival but had stopped earlier than he had. If that was the case, then this person was operating with knowledge of the story, just as he was. A rare occurrence, but not impossible. As Hyunsung walked beside Dokja, he questioned whether they should bring more people along, worried about what lay ahead. Dokja, however, remained firm. Their purpose was not to fight, but to decide the fate of those at Myeongdong Station. If they did nothing, those people would not survive for long. His thoughts turned grim. Unless they were incredibly lucky, the people who had become drifters would soon fall victim to stronger groups. It was the same fate that had befallen the members of the Landlord Coalition who had left Chungmuro. He turned to Senga, noticing the unease in her expression. He asked if she was saddened by their failure to turn the people of Myeongdong into allies. She admitted with some hesitation that she was. Dokja's response was firm. Trusting people too easily was dangerous. The world they once knew no longer existed, and things would not be as simple as she hoped. Senga understood, but there was still something inside her that resisted such a cold approach. She had made it this far by holding on to belief. Belief in others. Belief that there was still goodness left. When they finally arrived at Myeongdong Station, an unexpected sight greeted them. The place had already been attacked. The scene was brutal. Someone had struck first, leaving behind only the traces of destruction. Nearby, a group of men stood near the station, their posture tense. At the sight of Dokja and his group, the men reacted with panic. Without hesitation, they turned and fled toward Hohyeon Station, disappearing quickly on their bikes. Hyunsung's voice was heavy with confusion as he tried to understand who those people were and what had happened. Dokja could only stare at the scene before him. He could not believe what he was seeing. The way those men ran off so suddenly, it was as if they had known he was coming. Despite the devastation, one thing was clear. The flag holder of Myeongdong Station was empty. A notification flickered before Dokja's eyes. The system confirmed that no group currently occupied the station and asked whether he wanted to claim it. Without hesitation, he moved forward. He took his flag, plugged it into the flag holder, and pulled it out again. Immediately, another flag identical to his own appeared in the holder. A message confirmed the station's occupation. Myeongdong Station was now under his control. A station once claimed could not be taken unless the main base or its flag was removed. Another notification confirmed the expansion of his influence. The list of occupied stations now included Chungmuro as the main base and Myeongdong as an additional stronghold. His achievement points under the red flag increased, and the flag's color deepened, signaling his growing power. Then, another message arrived. A hidden scenario had been unlocked. The conditions were clear. He had to take over 10 or more stations within the given time period. Dokja's expression hardened. The dreadful scenario had finally begun. Sanga looked at the system message, her expression filled with concern. She could tell that this was not an ordinary scenario. The difficulty was evident, and she worried about Dokja. She wondered if he would be okay. Hyunsung, on the other hand, seemed relieved despite the situation. He expressed his gratitude that Dokja was their leader. Dokja remained silent for a moment, his thoughts drifting. He couldn't tell if they were genuinely good people or just naive. Most would be envious of the fact that he had obtained a hidden scenario, yet they stood by him without question. Hyunsung, with a hint of amusement, asked if he should start calling Dokja Your Majesty from now on. Dokja let out a small chuckle. The idea was ridiculous. He had no interest in such a title, nor did he desire anything like that. Heewon found the exchange amusing and laughed. She then addressed Dokja with mock formality, calling him Your Majesty, but her tone shifted to seriousness as she pointed out the urgency of the situation. If the hidden scenario was truly as it described, then they should focus on taking over another station as soon as possible. If Dokja valued the lives of those under his protection, they couldn't afford to waste time. Dokja knew she was right, but before expanding further, they needed information. The people who had attacked Myeongdong Station were still unknown to them. He made a decision. Their next destination would be Dongmyo. He turned to Heewon and Hyunsung, asking if they could accompany him. Sanga, who had been quietly listening, hesitated before speaking. She was ready to follow them, but Dokja stopped her. He wanted her to stay at Myeongdong. She faltered, taken aback. Her response was uncertain. She understood his reasoning, but it still stung. Dokja noticed her expression and called her name. She responded immediately, waiting for his words. He reminded her that not everyone was suited for the same tasks. Everyone had their own strengths. Sanga nodded, though a trace of doubt lingered in her eyes. Dokja could tell what she was thinking. She was questioning her role in the group. Unlike Heewon, she was not an experienced fighter. Unlike Hyunsung, she was not an unbreakable shield. And unlike Gilyong, she did not possess an extraordinary hidden ability. He recalled something she had once said in the subway. He repeated her own own words back to her, reminding her that she had her own life to live, just as he did. Senga's eyes brightened. She remembered those words clearly. With a smile, she admitted that she had even saved them on her phone. Dokja looked at Senga and spoke with certainty. Her presence at Chungmuro was essential. They couldn't leave Gilyong alone, and they needed someone to watch over Gongpildu. The remaining group members were anxious, and without guidance, they could fall into chaos. Moreover, there was the threat of Hohyeon. If those people decided to attack while they were away, the station would need to be defended. Gongpildu's skill was useful, but there might be situations where her abilities would be needed as well. With all these responsibilities in mind, Dokja decided to grant Senga a title. He turned to the others and asked for their thoughts. Senga was caught off guard by the suggestion, her surprise evident. Hyunsung, however, had no objections. If it was Senga, he had no problem with it. He smirked, amused by the formality of the situation. She once again called Dokja Your Majesty, playfully swearing her loyalty. Dokja shot her a glare. Did she really think this was the time for jokes? Senga hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was truly worthy of such a role, but Dokja made his decision. They shook hands, and a system message confirmed it. Senga had officially become the vice representative of Chungmuro Station. He looked at her seriously. He was only doing this because it was her. She wasn't just anyone. She was the best person for this role. In the world they had left behind, she had excelled in human resources. That skill set was more valuable now than ever. Senga's hesitation disappeared, replaced by determination. She accepted the role wholeheartedly. She would do her best. With that settled, Dokja and his group moved toward the tunnel on the east side. As they walked, Heewon spoke again, noting that Senga had seemed a little down lately. Dokja responded without hesitation. He hadn't done this just to make her feel better. He had chosen her because she was the perfect fit for the job. Deep down, he knew that Senga was more than just the admired HR employee that people in their old world had looked up to. Every person had their own expertise, and he had assigned her this role because it was where she belonged. Heewon, still in a playful mood, asked if she could have a title too, one that suited her. Dokja thought for a moment before offering a suggestion. She could be an executioner. Heewon immediately regretted asking. She dismissed the idea and changed the subject, bringing up the man on the rooftop. Heewon hesitated, glancing back as if debating whether to leave him behind. Dokja understood immediately. She was talking about Junghyuk. He assured her that Junghyuk would be fine. She studied him for a moment, then questioned how he seemed to know Junghyuk so well. Dokja didn't answer directly. Instead, he shifted the conversation, asking if she had a younger brother. Heewon confirmed, mentioning that he had just started 7th grade. Her voice held mild frustration as she described the experience. How younger siblings never listened, constantly picked fights, and even caused trouble at school. She had once been forced to step in for their mother because of him. Dokja then pointed out that despite all of that, she was still worried about him. There was a pause before she admitted that it was probably because they were family. Dokja responded simply, saying that was how he felt. She asked if he had a brother. He clarified. He had been talking about Junghyuk. There was a brief silence before Heewon acknowledged his words. She realized that despite what he claimed, he didn't seem to hate Junghyuk as much as he let on. Dokja didn't deny it. He stated that he had gotten into many fights because of Junghyuk. As he spoke, his thoughts drifted. In the early days of Ways of Survival, he hadn't been the only one reading. The first 10 episodes had gained a decent number of readers, and even by the 50th episode, there had still been 12. He recalled the arguments, the heated debates online, the people he had fought back then. He hadn't been much different from Namwoon, and now one of them might be standing in front of him soon. Hyunsung's voice interrupted his thoughts. He commented on how close the two of them had become. Heewon turned toward him, responding with mock irritation. She questioned why it mattered to him, teasingly asking if he was jealous. Hyunsung hesitated before clarifying. Dokja glanced at him, considering his background. Hyunsung had attended an all-boys school, majored in engineering, and then gone straight into the military. He had barely interacted with women. Hyunsung, seemingly unaware of their scrutiny, stated that they had arrived at Dongdaemun History and Culture Park Station. Dokja's focus sharpened. Something was wrong. The station was completely empty. A message flickered in the air. The station had already been occupied by Dongmyo Station. To take control, they had to seize Dongmyo's flag or occupy its flag holder. It was exactly as expected. Ilhun's body convulsed violently, his limbs shaking as if seized by an unseen force. His breath came in ragged gasps before his mouth opened in a scream. His words came out broken, his voice filled with terror. Saliva dripped from his lips as he stuttered out the name of the station. Dokja assessed the situation immediately. Dongdaemun Station had been taken over. It had been a trap. His thoughts raced. The forces at Myeongdong and Dongdaemun had attacked Chungmuro, but whoever had sent them had already known that they would fail. The true goal must have been something else. Myeongdong and Dongdaemun had likely been seized while the defenders were away. The men they had seen earlier at Myeongdong were probably part of this same group. His mind narrowed in on the real enemy. enemy, the ones who had anticipated the outcome, the ones who knew, not just about Chungmuro, not just about the battle, they knew about him. No, more than that, they knew who the original leader of Chungmuro was. That was their real target. There was no longer any doubt. These so-called prophets. Hyunsung's voice cut through his thoughts. Someone was approaching. Then a voice rang out. A man stepped forward, addressing Ilhun first before shifting his attention to the group. There was no friendliness in his tone, only a thinly veiled suspicion. He asked if Ilhun planned to introduce his guests. Dokja immediately activated his character profile skill, but a notification appeared. The profile could not be browsed. This person was not registered. His ability had failed. That was unexpected. Still, Dokja responded, stating that they were from Chungmuro. The man's expression shifted at the name. At that moment, sparks crackled in the air. Another notification flickered. Someone was using Explore Attribute on him, but before the ability could take effect, the exclusive skill Fourth Wall activated, blocking it entirely. The man staggered, as if struck by something invisible. His hesitation was brief, but noticeable. His eyes, now filled with confusion, locked onto Dokja. Then, a question. His tone was different this time, uncertain yet pressing. He wanted to know Dokja's name. Dokja considered his response. There was only one reason this man would react this way. The people who knew, the ones who understood the significance of Chungmuro's original leader. A slow grin spread across his face. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and heavy, carrying the weight of something undeniable. He gave his name, Jung-hyuk. Hee-won and Hyun-sung turned toward Dokja, their expressions filled with confusion. But Dokja had already seen what he needed to. The reaction had been immediate. The man's eyes had widened in shock, his entire body stiffening as if struck. He flinched, frozen in stunned silence. Dokja's thoughts moved quickly. Ways of Survival had frequently described Jung-hyuk's appearance. The same adjectives had been used over and over. With his own looks, he could make it believable. He watched the man carefully before speaking. The man, startled, quickly dismissed any concerns, addressing him with unexpected deference. Dokja recognized the fear. That was confirmation. The person standing before him had read Ways of Survival. The failed search attribute skill had made it obvious. The man must have realized who Hyunsung was by now. He had to believe that Dokja possessed the Eye of the Sage skill. Dokja pushed further. He accused the man of trying to use a skill to analyze them. The man swallowed hard, panic flashing across his face. A subordinate reacted, stepping forward in defiance. The voice was filled with indignation, but the words had barely left his mouth when a brutal impact cracked through the air. Blood erupted in a violent spray as the subordinate's head burst open. Screams tore through the group, echoing across the space. Beyond the blood, the man spoke quickly, his voice filled with terror. He apologized for the transgression, then introduced himself. His name was Sungguk Lee. He was the vice representative of Dongmyo Station. With that, Sungguk led Dokja and his companions deeper into Dongmyo Station. The moment they entered, murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Eyes followed them, filled with uncertainty and suspicion. Strangers had walked into their territory, and the unease was palpable. Hyunsung made a move to address Dokja by name, but before he could speak, Hee-won nudged him sharply, silencing him before the mistake could be made. Dokja leaned in, his voice a whisper, asking if she understood what was happening. Hee-won hesitated, but eventually acknowledged that she did. From that moment forward, Dokja continued acting as Jung-hyuk. Dokja maintained his act, his voice cold and commanding. He declared that Dongmyo Station now belonged to him and ordered Sungguk to leave. Sungguk hesitated, his confusion evident. The words didn't seem to register at first, but when they did, panic set in. He stammered, trying to argue. The idea of surrendering the station was unthinkable. A station that had already been claimed couldn't simply be given away. But Dokja was unmoved. His tone grew sharper, cutting through the hesitation like a blade. He stated the obvious. Sungguk, as the vice representative, had the authority to transfer the station. If he didn't comply before the count of 3, every single one of them would die. The atmosphere thickened with tension as Dokja began the count. There was still disbelief in Sungguk's eyes. He didn't seem to understand how serious the situation had become. Dokja moved without hesitation. His blade slid from its sheath, the air hissing as the Blade of Faith activated. White flames danced along the weapon, casting an eerie glow against Sungguk's pale face. The fear was immediate. Sungguk broke. His voice shook as he finally surrendered. But Dokja wasn't satisfied. The demand came swiftly. Dongmyo was not enough. He wanted Dongdaemun as well. Sungguk's expression twisted in terror. The delay had cost him. He stammered, trying to reason, begging for a chance to meet with their leader first. His voice was desperate, swearing on his king's honor that no harm would come to them. Dokja gave his answer without hesitation. Sungguk would lead the way. Notifications flickered in the air. The system had acknowledged the vow. Sungguk Lee, vice representative of Dongmyo, has made a promise on the king's honor. If he dared to break it, the consequences would be severe. Dokja Dokja recalled the details from TWSA. If his memory was correct, the leader of this place would be that loser. Sungguk bowed his head and led the group toward Dongmyo Station. Dokja's thoughts raced. There were two things he needed to confirm. First, whether Sungguk had a file on him. Second, how many prophets existed. People like Sungguk who had knowledge of the future. It was also clear that these people didn't have the same skills he did. Instead of character profile, they had used search attribute. That meant they didn't know much about him. But then there was something else. What exactly was Sungguk reading? Without hesitation, Dokja made his move. Spending 5,000 coins, he instantly raised his agility to level 30. The moment the points were allocated, his body reacted. His speed surged. In a blink, he closed the distance between him and Sungguk, his eyes locking onto the phone screen. For a split second, the contents were visible. A group chat. Sungguk gasped and yanked the phone away, stammering in denial. But Dokja had already seen it. A group chat. That meant internet access. How was that possible? And then it clicked. This was Dongmyo Station. That loser was here. That had to be the reason. Sungguk hurriedly changed the subject, leading them deeper into the station. Their leader was waiting inside. As they arrived at the platform, the scale of Dongmyo's operation became clear. The group was well organized. Unlike smaller factions, Dongmyo had a structured system. Many people moved about, some armed with weapons like Sungguk's group, but most unarmed. These unarmed ones, most likely wanderers, stragglers who had lost their groups and ended up here. The station had a brutal efficiency to it. Some members barked orders while others obeyed in silence. Bodies of ground rats littered the area. Some people were in the midst of slaughtering them under the supervision of Dongmyo's enforcers. Others were working on disassembling the corpses, likely to craft equipment from the remains. It was clear. This place operated like its own kingdom. Dokja made a quick decision. Heewon and Hyunsung would wait here. He instructed them to stand guard and stay put. Then, lowering his voice, he gave one last warning. Heewon was to make sure Hyunsung didn't say anything reckless. Heewon, playing along with his act, straightened up and bowed, addressing him in mock formality. Her tone was exaggerated, as if she were one of Junghyuk's devoted subordinates. And then there was Hyunsung. For some reason, he bowed too. Dokja sighed internally. Heewon was enjoying this way too much. The King of Dongmyo, one of the 7 kings of TWSA, the boy who would soon become the basement-dwelling king of the shadows. He had already walked more than half the path of a king. As Dokja stepped inside, his gaze locked onto the frail figure sitting before him. The moment he activated character profile, the details appeared. Han Dong-hoon, age 17. His supporting constellation was shadow behind the curtain. But something was wrong. He was currently under a powerful hypnosis. Dokja took in his surroundings. Now it made sense. The people of Dongmyo could access the internet because of Dong-hoon. From the moment the scenarios had begun, internet access across all of Seoul had been blocked. The dokkaebi had set up streaming channels, isolating the city from outside communication. Those beyond Seoul had no idea what was happening here. The boy's fingers twitched. A notification appeared. Dong-hoon had activated comments manipulation at level 3. As soon as the skill activated, dozens of comments flooded in beneath the boy's own. A reaction, but not one of his own free will. Sungguk addressed the boy, instructing him to greet the guest. Slowly, Dong-hoon's sunken eyes turned toward Dokja. His lips trembled and his voice came out broken, hesitant. His words stuttered, barely forming a proper greeting. Dokja watched closely. Dong-hoon had social anxiety, that much was true, but not like this. This wasn't normal hesitation, this was something unnatural. Sungguk turned to Dokja, suggesting they begin negotiations. Dokja didn't even bother to hide his reaction. Negotiations with this. His voice was sharp, his disbelief clear. Dong-hoon was their supposed leader, yet he was nothing more than a puppet, a shell of a person, controlled and manipulated. Sungguk hesitated, his hands trembling as he checked something on his smartphone. A deep sigh broke the silence. Dokja's eyes narrowed. He had already figured it out. Sungguk was the one in control here. After a brief pause, Sungguk finally admitted it. Dokja had seen right through him and wasted no time questioning his true intentions. If he was the true leader, then there had to be a reason for bringing him here instead of discussing matters openly. The tense surroundings felt heavy, shielded from outside interference. The block soundwave skill was active, ensuring that this conversation remained private. Sungguk revealed his identity. He was a prophet, one of many. Dokja processed the revelation carefully. At last, he was gaining access to the answers he had been searching for. Sungguk spoke of a power that supposedly belonged to him, the miracle of regression, a unique ability, something possessed by no one else. It allowed him to turn back time, repeating the world over and over, reliving lives that no one else remembered. The words carried a sense sense of reverence, as though the struggle had been acknowledged, as though the endless fight had not gone unnoticed. The words were chosen carefully. The depiction of a warrior battling endlessly against horrifying enemies, fighting for humanity against monstrous forces, was spoken with admiration. It was framed as a lonely, noble fight, one that deserved recognition. Dokja thought that the way Sungguk spoke was so compelling that even Jungyuk Yu might have been moved by it. Sungguk spoke of necessity. The path ahead could not be walked alone. Regression was a miracle, but miracles had limits. If there had been countless lifetimes before, then there had also been countless failures. This time, however, would be different. For 10 years, the prophets had been receiving revelations. They had foreseen this moment. Unlike before, this time they were prepared to aid him. They were not just observers, they were meant to assist. Dokja needed to understand the nature of these revelations. The mention of a record, a book of revelations, shifted his focus. The book passed down among the prophets chronicled every detail of his legendary path. It documented his past, his present, and his future. Realization struck, a book that contained the full account of events in this world, an all-knowing record that guided those who read it. This was not just any prophecy, it was TWSA. Sungguk revealed that through the Book of Revelations, they had known in advance about the presence of Steelblade Hyunsung Lee under Dokja's command. Even if certain individuals were not physically present, they had predicted the existence of delusional demon Namwoon Kim and Naval General Lee Jihye within his group. The certainty in his words suggested deep faith in this so-called prophecy. Dokja questioned the location of this Book of Revelations. The response was not ideal. The original copy had been lost, damaged beyond repair. However, Sungguk reassured him that its contents had not disappeared entirely. Each prophet had memorized fragments of the book, preserving its knowledge. Their goal was clear. They sought to guide Dokja, ensuring that he walked what they believed to be the righteous path. They spoke of a future where his journey would be different, where his choices would not mirror the past regressions they assumed he had experienced. Dokja remained silent for a moment before addressing Sungguk directly. If these so-called revelations had been given to him, what did they intend to do with them? The answer was immediate. They desired an alliance, at least in name. In truth, their intention was to place themselves under Dokja's command. The real meaning behind their words became clear. They wished to take a free ride on his strength. Dokja found it intriguing. Sungguk, sensing a shift in the conversation, hesitantly asked if that meant Dokja would accept. But Dokja dismissed the notion immediately. They had misunderstood. How could he consider forming an alliance with people he knew nothing about? If they wished to stand beside him, they first had to reveal who they truly were. Sungguk hesitated, faltering as he stammered in confusion. Had he not already introduced himself? Had he not already given enough information? Dokja's gaze hardened. He issued a single command: kneel. The hesitation in Sungguk's voice was evident as he struggled to comprehend what he had just heard. Dokja did not waver. His command was absolute. He wanted Sungguk to kneel and recite the attributes he possessed. In his mind, Dokja considered the possible thoughts running through Sungguk's head. If Sungguk truly believed that Dokja was Junghyuk, he would be confused. Junghyuk possessed the Eye of the Sage skill, allowing him to see a person's attributes without needing them to recite them. Sungguk would question why he was being asked to reveal his abilities. Without hesitation, Sungguk obeyed. He knelt, his voice carrying the weight of unease as he confessed his attribute. He was a hypnotist. Dokja recognized the significance immediately. Sungguk was the one responsible for placing Ilhun under hypnosis. Dokja pressed further. There had to be more. Sungguk hesitated, confusion creeping into his expression. Dokja remained unmoved. If that was all he had to offer, then Sungguk was of no use. Then the word slipped out. The ninth. Dokja caught on to the phrase instantly and demanded clarification. Sungguk, barely able to meet his gaze, admitted it. He was the ninth renouncer. The weight of that title settled in Dokja's mind. He questioned its meaning. How many more were there? The term was unfamiliar. Dokja had never encountered it before. Sungguk stammered in response. The prophets had never made their existence known before now. That was the only reason the title seemed unfamiliar. But something about it struck Dokja as strange. Why renouncer and not revelator? The hesitation in Sungguk's demeanor grew stronger. His words stumbled over themselves as he grasped for an explanation. It was because of the Book of Revelations, or rather, the order in which they had stopped reading it. The answer only raised more questions. Dokja demanded an explanation. Why had they stopped reading? Sungguk faltered. The revelations were too complex, too profound to decipher. They had been beyond the comprehension of the prophets. Dokja's expression remained cold. If Sungguk was only the ninth person to abandon reading the Book of Revelations, then he doubted the man could offer anything useful. Panic seized Sungguk. Fear rushed through him as he scrambled to plead his worth. He insisted that he could still be of help. Dokja's patience ran thin. His gaze darkened. Sungguk's hands kept moving. He was constantly fidgeting with his phone. tone. Dokja's voice cut through the tension. The sharp accusation made Sunguk flinch as he gave an excuse of being addicted to smartphones. Meanwhile, outside the tent, Heewon and Hyunsung stood guard. One of the guards from the settlement approached, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized them. The man's expression hardened. He hadn't seen them before. Suspicion laced his voice as he questioned their presence, demanding to know who had allowed them to loiter in the area. Heewon's stance didn't waver. Her tone was sharp, filled with annoyance. She had no patience for pointless authority. The man's irritation flared instantly. His words carried arrogance, dismissing Heewon as someone not even worth acknowledging. His disdain was clear. She wasn't part of the so-called supporting cast. The insult barely settled before Heewon's patience snapped. The words left her lips like a blade cutting through silence. The man's expression darkened. Fury twisted his features as he processed the insult. His anger reached its peak. His hand shot to his back, grabbing a massive ring sword. But it wasn't enough. Heewon moved first. Her blade sliced through the air, precise and effortless. The man's attack never had a chance to land. Inside the tent, the moment Lee Sunguk was about to speak, the ground trembled. The vibration rippled through the area, powerful enough to be felt despite the sound wave blocking skill. The sudden disturbance shattered the tense negotiation. Without hesitation, Lee Sunguk and Dokja rushed outside. The sight that met them was clear. Heewon stood with her weapon drawn, the tension thick between her and the man who had threatened her. Dokja's voice cut through the chaos as he urged Heewon to stop. Heewon stopped before things could escalate further. Sunguk immediately stepped in, apologizing for his companion's actions. His friend had acted recklessly, and he urged him to apologize. The man hesitated for a moment before reluctantly offering an apology. Dokja watched the situation unfold, his thoughts racing. The fight had been cut short just in time. If they had been a few seconds too late, Heewon would have killed the man without hesitation. Curious about the man's identity, Dokja attempted to check his character profile. However, a system message informed him that no registered profile existed for this individual. It didn't take long for him to understand. The man was a prophet too. Turning his attention to Heewon, Dokja questioned her, reminding her that he had told her to stay put. Heewon, still furious, tried to argue. That man had been the one who... But Dokja's voice cut through her anger, his tone sharp. Her name echoed in the tense air. Heewon clenched her fists before swallowing her pride. She apologized, addressing him as Mr. Yu, then turned and walked away. The man's expression shifted at her words. He repeated the name, questioning if she had really meant Jung Hyuk. Dokja confirmed it without hesitation. Then he turned the question back on him. Was he a prophet as well? The man remained silent, unwilling to answer. Sunguk then spoke, addressing Dokja directly. He apologized once more, but requested a private conversation with his companion. He needed to speak with him alone. Dokja allowed it, but gave a warning. They shouldn't take too long. Sunguk quickly acknowledged his words before leading the man away. Without wasting a second, Dokja reached out to Baehyung. Calling his name, he demanded an ability. Baehyung's response came with his usual sarcasm, asking if Dokja was enjoying himself again. Dokja ignored the comment and made his request. He wanted hearing enhancement. The cost, 2,000 coins. Baehyung hesitated for a brief moment before falling silent. It only took 3 seconds for the adjustment to be made. An advertisement flashed, confirming the transaction. Dokja activated the skill. His hearing was now enhanced. Baehyung gave a warning. With the fourth scenario approaching, mid-level dokkaebi would soon appear, making things more dangerous. Dokja remained silent, focusing on the distant conversation between Sunguk and the other man. Minsub hesitated before speaking, his tone filled with doubt. Something felt off. Sunguk asked what he meant. Minsub continued, expressing his suspicion. Was Dokja really Jung Hyuk Yu? The original author described Jung Hyuk as someone handsome, but looking at Dokja, he wasn't convinced. Sunguk dismissed the comment, reminding him that people had different perspectives. However, there was no doubt. Dokja was Jung Hyuk. Minsub remained skeptical. Sunguk was only the 9th renouncer. His knowledge wasn't reliable, especially since he had admitted to forgetting many things over time. Sunguk, however, was confident in his memory. He possessed the memory enhancement skill, which allowed him to recall events with precision. Without his abilities, Minsub wouldn't have survived this long, but Minsub still wasn't convinced. Something didn't add up. He understood the presence of Hyunsung, but there was a woman with them who wasn't supposed to be there. If he remembered correctly, she hadn't appeared in the 3rd regression. Sunguk saw only one way to settle the doubt. He suggested that Minsub test Dokja. If he truly was Jung Hyuk, this was the perfect chance to prove it and show others who had read beyond 50 episodes that they knew the truth. Dokja's thought thoughts darkened at the suggestion. These were the same people who had left harsh comments, ridiculing Jung-hyuk-yu, calling him weak. A few moments later, Sungguk and Minsub returned to him. Minsub lowered his head in apology. His earlier behavior had been disrespectful and he wanted to introduce himself properly. His name was Minsub. Dokja wasted no time and asked what number he was. Minsub flinched and whispered to Sungguk, questioning if he had revealed that information. Sungguk admitted he had no choice. With hesitation, Minsub answered, he was the 1089th renouncer. Dokja wanted to know more. Were all the other prophets also renouncers? How many of them existed in total? Minsub responded, there were about 48 that they knew of. Dokja found the number lower than expected. The first episode of Ways of Survival had been viewed by around 1,200 people. By episode 10, the number had dropped to 129. Based on that, he had assumed there would be at least 100 prophets. After all, the novel had been serialized for over 10 years. Sungguk shared his own thoughts. It was possible that there had been many more prophets in the beginning, but they might have died during the first scenario. Dokja found it hard to believe. They had known the future, yet they had died. Sungguk hesitated before explaining. Many of them had only recently come to understand that the prophecy was real. If not for a certain person, even he might not have survived. Minsub spoke again. As a reader of the revelation, he was honored to meet Dokja, though he had some lingering questions. Dokja could tell that Minsub still had doubts about whether he was really Jung-hyuk. Minsub stammered in denial, but Dokja allowed him to continue. Minsub mentioned something strange. From his memory, the delusional demon, Namwoon Kim, had been present during the third regression. However, now, a woman stood in his place. At first, Minsub thought she was Jihei, but she seemed older and had a different name. Dokja confirmed it. The delusional demon no longer existed in the current regression. Sungguk was stunned. He didn't understand what that meant. Minsub hesitated, then asked the question neither of them wanted to say out loud. Had Namwoon Kim been killed? Dokja confirmed it. The delusional demon had died at the hands of one of them. Sungguk was shaken. A prophet, someone like them, had been responsible? Dokja didn't know if the killer had been a prophet, but it seemed likely. That person had known the future, perhaps even better than they did. Not only had he eliminated the delusional demon, but he had also completed all the hidden scenarios. Because of him, Dokja's entire plan had been ruined. Sungguk could barely process the revelation. This wasn't possible. In truth, Dokja was speaking about himself. Dokja spoke with certainty. The man they were discussing had even started impersonating him recently. The last time they had met, Dokja had beaten him badly, but he was likely still somewhere near Chungmuro. Sungguk quickly pulled out his smartphone, his expression shifting. The mention of Chungmuro made him realize something. At that moment, a message flickered in Dokja's vision. The constellation's secretive plotter was impressed by his shameless lies. Sungguk seemed to piece things together. That explained why there had been changes in the third regression. Minsub was convinced. Dokja truly was Jung-hyuk-yu. Sungguk hesitated for a moment before revealing something important. He might know the identity of the one who killed the delusional demon. Dokja's focus sharpened. He needed to know more. Sungguk confirmed it, but insisted that there was something he needed to explain first. Not all prophets were on the same side. There was a group known as the 12 Disciples. They claimed to have read the true prophecy and believed they had the power to change the world. More importantly, they had read further into the prophecy than the others. Dokja processed this information carefully. 12. That was the exact number of views episode 50 of Ways of Survival had received. Sungguk continued. As of now, 11 of these disciples were known. The prophet Dokja had encountered was likely the last disciple, an unknown figure. Unlike the others who aimed to save the world, the disciples sought control over it. They were not interested in stopping its downfall. They only cared about their own survival. This was why they were asking for Dokja's help. But deep inside, Dokja felt a weight of guilt. If there were 12 disciples, and if only 12 people had read episode 50, then there was a strong chance that he was the 12th. Sungguk spoke with urgency. They wanted to follow Dokja. They needed him to put an end to the heretics. Dokja accepted. He would help them, but first, he wanted control over Changsan Station. Sungguk seemed surprised. So that was his target. Minsub, however, had bad news. He regretted to inform Dokja that they could not grant him Changsan Station. It did not belong to the Dongmyo group. At the moment, Changsan Station was ruled by a man known as the Tyrant King. Dokja's thoughts turned serious. The Tyrant King, one of the 7 kings of Seoul. At this point in the story, he was just as powerful as Jung-hyuk. It was far too early for him to have claimed his title, but apparently some prophets had unintentionally helped him gain power too soon. They did not even remember what had happened in the novel. If they were the ones shaping the world, there was no way they were doing a good job. Sungguk remained confident as he spoke, assuring that there was no need for concern. Their preparations had been thorough, and soon their secret weapon would be ready to strike against the Tyrant King. But this weapon was not just meant for a single target. Minsub revealed revealed that its purpose extended beyond one battle. It was also a tool against the 12 disciples, those who sought to reshape the world in their own image. The timing of Dokja's arrival could not have been more perfect. The moment of action was approaching, and soon he would witness the weapon in use. But there was something more pressing. Minsub mentioned an upcoming gathering, the Night of the Prophets, a meeting that deliberately excluded the 12 disciples. It was an event where only select individuals would be present, those who claimed to understand the truth of the prophecy. And now, Dokja was expected to attend. The weight of their words settled in Dokja's mind. Their actions were already straying far from the original course of events. The situation with the Tyrant King had been altered, and their interference was bound to disrupt the story even further. Left unchecked, their influence would only continue to spiral out of control. With the conversation at an end, Dokja stepped away from the meeting and returned to rest with his companions inside a tent. Unlike the temporary shelters they had encountered before, this place had been built with careful organization. Heewon took note of the individual rooms scattered throughout the camp, a sign of just how much this group had grown. The scale of their operation had clearly expanded beyond simple survival. Hyunsung, however, was more focused on the way they treated Dokja. It was clear that they truly believed him to be Junghyuk. Amidst their conversation, a sudden notification appeared before Dokja. A new ability had become available. The Navy flag had undergone a transformation, and now a special feature awaited activation. Without hesitation, he made his decision, spending 3,500 coins to awaken its power. A shift in the air followed as the group chat function became accessible, linking him directly to his team members. Heewon and Hyunsung had not expected such an ability and looked to Dokja in surprise, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. The results of his earlier negotiations had granted him control over Dongdaemun and Cheonggu, and as a result, his flag had changed its color. With these new additions, his total reach had expanded to 5 stations, yet one crucial piece was still missing. Changsan Station had remained out of his grasp. Its location had led him to believe that it was under Dongmyo's control, but that assumption had been a mistake. The truth was more complicated. The prophets who had taken hold of these areas did not remember the details of the novel as he did. The decisions they made were not guided by knowledge, but by fragmented recollections, leading them further away from the story's original path. Heewon took a moment to process everything. The realization that these people had knowledge of the future was unsettling. Hyunsung seemed to grasp the reasoning behind Dokja's deception. Pretending to be Junghyuk had been a necessary choice. Dokja confirmed this without hesitation. There was a moment of pause before Heewon spoke again. If that was the case, then staying here a little longer might be in their best interest. They needed to gather more information before moving forward, but Dokja remained firm. He would end things here and now. There was no more time to waste. Dokja took out a small cloak, and the moment it wrapped around him, his figure disappeared into the darkness. It was a privilege item meant for gold members, Recluse's cloak. Moving unnoticed, he blended into the shadows, slipping past the drowsy guards without a sound. His destination was clear, and soon he stood before Donghoon's tent. A barrier of sound wave blocking surrounded it, ensuring that whatever happened inside would remain unheard by those outside. Confident in this, Dokja stepped in quietly. Approaching from behind, he swiftly covered Donghoon's mouth. The boy gasped in shock, struggling instinctively against the sudden grip. Without hesitation, Dokja reached into his pocket and retrieved the mental awakening medicine. The stimulant worked immediately as he fed it to Donghoon, causing a visible shift in the boy's expression. The haze of hypnosis began to lift, and clarity returned to his wide, fearful eyes. Donghoon sat frozen, terror creeping into his face as he tried to make sense of what was happening. But Dokja remained calm, his presence unwavering. He understood the boy's intelligence. Donghoon would recognize the truth soon enough. If he had meant harm, he wouldn't have undone the hypnosis in the first place. There was no reason to fear. More importantly, he wasn't here for the flag. The boy's lips trembled, struggling to find words. The weight of the manipulation he had endured still clung to him, yet Dokja had no time for hesitation. He had come here with a purpose. He reached into his pocket once more, this time pulling out his smartphone. There was another way to communicate, one that would make things easier for someone like Donghoon. The boy's social anxiety was severe, making face-to-face interactions difficult. If the prophets had controlled him until now, then giving him another voice was the first step in breaking free. The dim glow of the smartphone reflected in Donghoon's eyes. He stared at the screen for a moment before hesitantly reaching out. A quiet muttering escaped his lips, activating his ability. A notification appeared. Donghoon had used wide area internet. The signal spread across Seoul Dome, connecting to Dokja's device. As long as Donghoon's consciousness remained uninterrupted, the internet would function. Moments later, Donghoon's name appeared in the smartphone messenger. Donghoon hesitated as he typed his response, his thoughts still clouded by uncertainty. The words on the screen reflected his confusion, but Dokja remained patient. The boy had heard similar words before. Sunguk had once said the same thing. Dokja understood his fear. clear. Everything had changed too quickly, leaving Dong-hoon stranded between doubt and trust. The prophets had manipulated him, shaping his reality to fit their design. Now, standing on the other side, Dokja offered something different. He asked the boy a simple question. Did he despise the prophets? Did he want to see them gone? If he wished for it, Dokja could erase them from his world. They had no place in the future Dong-hoon wanted to create. The boy's fingers hovered over the screen before finally responding. He had already figured it out. Dokja was only here for his power. That was all anyone wanted. But Dokja's reply was unexpected. He didn't want to use Dong-hoon's abilities. He wanted the opposite. From this moment on, he didn't want the boy to do anything at all. Inside another tent, Sungguk and Minsub sat together, exhaustion clear in their voices as they spoke. The end was finally in sight. By tomorrow, everything would be over. The thought of a drink after all of this felt almost too good to be true. Minsub sighed, thinking of the days ahead. Sungguk recalled an unsettling moment from earlier. Junghyuk's gaze had lingered on him, sharp and piercing, as if searching for something beyond the surface. Minsub dismissed the concern. Sungguk had only read the prologue. He couldn't even be sure whether Junghyuk had truly activated his skill or if it was just paranoia. But there was a bigger issue at hand. The others were growing restless. Doubt was creeping in. Some wanted to leave, to check Chungmuro for themselves. Sungguk shook his head. This wasn't the time for questions. Minsub needed to handle it. He reached for his phone, intending to set things straight, but his expression changed in an instant. The connection was gone. The internet had stopped working. A frustrated curse escaped Sungguk. Dong-hoon must have fallen asleep again. There was no other reason for the sudden loss of signal. He ordered Minsub to check on him. With a sigh, Minsub pushed himself up, muttering about the hassle. But just as he reached the tent's exit, his body collided with something invisible. Confused, he reached out, and the moment his fingers brushed against the unseen presence, a sharp sound filled the air. A piercing scream followed as Minsub collapsed onto the ground, pain shooting through him. The air shimmered, and a figure stepped forward. The recluse's cloak faded from sight, revealing Dokja standing in front of them. In his grip was the blade of faith. Sungguk's breath caught in his throat as he looked up, his voice shaking with disbelief. The man standing before him was the last person he had expected to see. Outside the tent, chaos erupted. Hee-won's voice cut through the tension, calling out to Dokja. She had managed to take down a few of their enemies, but they were outnumbered. There were too many to hold back for long. Before Dokja could respond, she disappeared, her movement swift as the sounds of battle rang out from the distance. The guards would come rushing in soon. Time was running out. Sungguk's voice trembled with fear as he took a step back. The situation had spiraled out of control, and now he was face to face with someone far more dangerous than he had expected. His words came out in a desperate stammer. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Even if Junghyuk himself had stood before them, there was no way one person could take on all of them. But Dokja had no intention of fighting everyone. That was unnecessary. All he needed to do was take out the leader. In one swift motion, the ether blade sliced through the air, grazing young Minsub's armor. A sharp cracking sound followed as the protective layer split apart. Minsub let out a scream, his body jerking from the pain as fabric tore. A piece of cloth slipped out and fluttered to the ground. It was the flag of Dongmyo. Dokja's gaze darkened as he stared at the emblem. It all made sense now. No one would be foolish enough to openly display the flag of their faction. This wasn't an accident. This was proof of true leadership. So young Minsub had been the real leader of Dongmyo all along. The prophets had never intended to put Dong-hoon in charge. He had simply been a puppet, held under hypnosis and exploited for his abilities. The real mastermind had always been hidden, keeping the illusion intact. Sungguk had never been the leader. It had been Minsub from the beginning. Dokja bent down and picked up the fallen flag. A message flickered before him that you have obtained the flag of the Dongmyo group. The navy flag had transformed into a brown one, shielding you with its power. Sungguk's expression twisted in horror. His last hope of escaping this situation was crumbling. If the other prophets learned about this, there would be consequences. But there was one problem. Without internet, there was no way to warn them, and Dokja knew this well. He watched as Sungguk struggled to make sense of everything, his voice breaking under pressure. He demanded an answer. Why was this happening? Why had Dokja turned against them? But Dokja saw no point in responding. At this stage, nothing he said would change the outcome. Even if he truly had been Junghyuk, he would have never aligned himself with people like them. The realization struck Minsub before Sungguk could even form a reply. His body tensed, his face paling as a terrible thought crossed his mind. Dokja's lips curled into a grin. They should have read until the end. The weight of exhaustion finally settled over Dokja as he allowed himself to rest. For the first time in a long while, he slept soundly. His mind drifted in the quiet embrace of sleep, undisturbed by the burdens that had followed him for so long. When he finally woke, he stretched, letting out a yawn. It had been a while since he had felt this well rested. The events events of the previous night ran through his mind. After dealing with Sungguk and Min-soob, he had moved quickly, securing his position. He had gone to the neighboring stations near Dongmyo and planted his flag, solidifying his control. A total of 9 stations were now under his rule. Only one more remained. With that final station, the King's Path scenario would be complete. One of the core objectives of the scenario was almost within his grasp. He glanced at the time. It was already 4 p.m. Hyun-sung stood nearby, his steady gaze fixed on Dokja as he stirred. Hyeon, already prepared for departure, waited with an expectant stance. The group was ready to move, but no decision had been made yet. Dokja did not answer immediately. His attention shifted towards Sungguk and Min-soob. A question hung in the air as Dokja addressed them. Their response came in weak, trembling voices, pleading for mercy. The weight of their survival pressed upon them, and they knew the balance could tip at any moment. There had been a moment the night before when he had considered killing them. They were dangerous in their own way, but their usefulness outweighed the risk. For now, the decision was made and their lives were spared. Conditions had to be set. The first was simple. His true identity was not to be revealed. A single word spoken to the wrong person, and the consequences would be immediate. Their agreement came swiftly, voices overlapping in their eagerness to comply. The second condition was even stricter. They were to obey. Every action, every decision would be dictated by him. There would be no room for independent choices. Again, there was no hesitation. Fear had made them pliant, and they submitted without question. It was enough for now. Their survival depended on their usefulness, and though they had been spared, the future remained uncertain. Whether or not they would continue to breathe depended entirely on their actions. Relief washed over them, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had lived to see another day. A final question emerged, hesitant yet inevitable. A name was needed, a way to address him properly. The answer was given without much thought. To them, he would remain as he was. But before the other prophets, the name would be different. Before them, he would be Junghyuk. Another order followed, directed at Min-soob. The mask he carried was needed. Min-soob did not question the demand. The mask was relinquished without resistance, placed into Dokja's waiting hands. If the deception was to continue, it had to be convincing. The mask was a necessary piece of that illusion. As it settled into place, a shift occurred. The figure standing before them no longer seemed the same. What had been a disguise moments ago now felt disturbingly real. Sungguk and Minsa barely concealed their shock. The resemblance was uncanny, undeniable. A murmur of disbelief escaped Sungguk. The image before them, the face beneath the mask, there was no mistaking it. This was Junghyuk, or at least it was exactly as they had always imagined him to be. Minsoob's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. He had heard the prophecy, but now that he was witnessing it himself, he couldn't help but be in awe. The man standing before him matched the description perfectly. The prophecy had been true all along. Dokja considered the mask in his hands. The fugitive's mask was a highly useful item, capable of altering one's appearance. It was fortunate that Min-soob had possessed something so valuable. He would have to keep up the act of being Junghyuk Yu to attend the Night of the Prophets, and this mask would help him maintain that illusion. As he adjusted it, he briefly considered making minor changes to his hairstyle to better fit the role. His thoughts shifted as he studied Min-soob and Sungguk. He had taken them in for their usefulness, but there was still much he didn't know about them. It would be wise to gather more information while they were still in his grasp. Without waiting for a response, he quickly checked Min-soob's character profile. Yesterday, the man's attributes had not been visible, but today, he had become one of the recognized characters. The system acknowledged his existence now. Without hesitation, Dokja extended his hand. The two men reacted immediately, handing over their phones without question. Their obedience was expected, but he still checked them carefully. The devices were offline. That was good. No phone, no mask. Without these, they had no means of contacting anyone or hiding anything from him. At that moment, Dong-hoon re-established the internet connection, and the notifications flooded in. A message arrived, a brief statement that carried an unmistakable weight. Dong-hoon was willing to place his trust in him, just this once. Dokja's gaze shifted toward the tent where Dong-hoon was stationed. A fleeting thought passed through his mind before he acknowledged the message. Then his focus returned to the device in his hand. As he checked the group chat, something caught his attention. There were 36 participants. Sungguk's voice broke the silence, offering an explanation. The prophets in this chat were all early renouncers, none of them disciples. That meant they had stopped reading before reaching the crucial points. They were blind to the deeper truths. But there was something else. Sungguk had not forgotten the words spoken the previous night. The weight of those words still lingered in the air. The implication of them, the curiosity they sparked, all led to one inevitable question. Did Dokja know about the revelation? A knowing smile formed as he absorbed the weight of their expectations. They would soon understand. Meeting him instead of Junghyuk Yu had been their greatest fortune. Dokja monitored the group chat through Lee Sungguk's smartphone, scanning through the messages messages exchanged between the prophets. Their conversations revolved around their fragmented understanding of the unfolding events, a stark contrast to what could have been if they had read Ways of Survival with him back then. Now, their ignorance of the coming days left them vulnerable. After gathering their belongings, they carefully made their way toward Anguk Station, avoiding zones filled with ongoing conflicts. The Night of the Prophets had begun. As they arrived, murmurs filled the air. The location remained unclaimed, untouched by any dominant faction. The place functioned like a neutral zone, a sanctuary maintained by an unspoken agreement between the prophets to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Establishing a meeting point at an occupied station would have been far too dangerous. Among the scattered figures, one of the prophets stepped forward and greeted Minsub. The two exchanged pleasantries, though the exhaustion in the prophet's voice was evident. The battles against the tyrant king had taken their toll. Minsub reminded him that venturing toward Dobong-gu had been a reckless choice, but his words barely masked the underlying tension. The prophet's gaze soon drifted to Dokja, his expression changing the moment recognition set in. His posture stiffened, and his voice wavered as he hesitantly asked the question lingering in his mind. Minsub responded with a simple nod. Almost immediately, the atmosphere shifted. The growing realization spread through the surrounding prophets, drawing them closer in waves. Faces filled with shock and awe turned toward Dokja, their eyes widening as if witnessing a figure they had only imagined through text. One by one, they pushed forward, eager to confirm what they had just heard. The gathering prophets whispered among themselves. Some marveled at his appearance, commenting on how he exceeded their expectations. Others stepped forward with reverent introductions, their voices filled with excitement as they announced their prophet numbers. Dokja stood at the center of the gathering, their admiring gazes fixed on him, each one eager to earn his favor. The atmosphere carried an almost tangible reverence, as if his presence alone validated their beliefs. Among the prophets, one individual stepped forward with an expectant look. He introduced himself as the 1168th, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. His words revealed a familiarity with events that had only been mentioned in passing within the Ways of Survival, moments that had never been explicitly detailed. Dokja took note of the number. This prophet had likely read through at least 50 episodes, an impressive feat compared to the others present. The mention of Asmodeus further confirmed it. This person might have been the most well-read among them. Without hesitation, the prophet inquired about the current regression. His question held an underlying expectation, as if hoping for a different answer, but Dokja confirmed it. This was indeed the third regression. A subtle sadness flickered across the prophet's face, his demeanor shifting ever so slightly. Dokja inwardly dismissed the reaction. There was no need for disappointment. Jung-hyuk had already proven himself formidable in his earlier regressions. While the attention remained on him, another commotion unfolded nearby. A different group of prophets had gathered around Hyun-sung, their voices filled with enthusiasm as they called out his name. They spoke with admiration, marveling at his physique, referring to him by a title he had never heard before. The Steel Blade. Hyun-sung flushed under the sudden praise, his embarrassment evident as he awkwardly denied the title. Meanwhile, another passing prophet turned their attention toward Hee-won. The question came with a tinge of expectation. Was she by any chance the famed naval commander? Hee-won's response was immediate and firm, a simple denial, given without further elaboration. The prophet accepted the answer without protest and moved on. As Dokja took in the scene around him, a realization settled in. This gathering, meant to be the Night of the Prophets, felt more like a chaotic marketplace. Voices overlapped, exchanges flared with enthusiasm, and the supposed mystique of the event was quickly unraveling into something far less dignified. Without losing focus, Dokja turned his attention back to the matter at hand. The demand for the weapon left no room for hesitation. The 763rd prophet eagerly stepped forward, moving toward the center of the platform. With a dramatic gesture, he removed the cloth covering the supposed secret weapon. Beneath the fabric lay a large stone. The moment Dokja's eyes fell upon it, a memory surfaced. Meteorites crashing down. A celestial storm witnessed from the rooftop of the theater. Recognition struck instantly. A meteorite. The confirmation came as the 763rd prophet explained further. He spoke with excitement, unaware of the growing unease settling within Dokja. According to him, the meteorite contained a powerful artifact, something of immense value. Dokja knew better. Meteorites didn't hatch instantly. It required time, an incubation period that couldn't be rushed. Yet the prophets had been tirelessly supplying it with mana, working in shifts to accelerate the process. They believed it would hatch that very night, convinced that their efforts would soon bear fruit. Something was wrong. A red meteorite. That detail alone sent a wave of alarm through Dokja's mind. Only someone who had read up to the fourth regression would possess knowledge of this. The implications were immediate and dangerous. His voice cut through the gathering as he demanded to know the source of this information. Who had revealed the existence of the meteorite? Who had led them to believe this was a weapon? Silence followed. The 763rd prophet hesitated, confused by the sudden intensity in Dokja's voice. The question lingered unanswered. Dokja's patience snapped. His voice rose in urgency, demanding to know who had brought the meteorite there. Who had set this plan in motion? The hesitation among the prophets was telling. Minsub finally spoke, revealing that the one responsible had not yet arrived. Panic surged. This was a trap. Dokja's thoughts raced, piecing together the sinister truth. There was no way someone who had given up early in the scenario could possess such knowledge. The idea of using the meteorite as a weapon was insanity, an unthinkable strategy that should not exist at this point in time. Then beneath them, the platform trembled. A deep rumbling shook the ground. The meteorite trembled violently, cracks forming along its surface. Dokja instinctively stepped back, alarm seizing his senses. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not now. He had come to eliminate the prophets, not to get caught in their foolishness. A surge of regret flashed through his mind. Trusting these people had been a mistake. They hadn't even read the novel to its conclusion, yet they acted as if they understood its horrors. Confusion spread among the prophets. Their excitement drowned out the warning signs. Some gasped. Others whispered in awe. They truly believed the meteorite was about to reveal its supposed treasure. Dokja's voice rang out. He called for Heewon and Hyunsung, urging them to run. But before they could react, the energy expanded, spreading like a wildfire across the platform. A shimmering barrier rose, enclosing Enguk Station in an unbreakable prison. There would be no escape. He turned to Youngmin Sub, demanding to know if the 1124th prophet had orchestrated this gathering. But Minsub hesitated, uncertain. The meeting had seemed like a collective decision, not the work of any single individual. It didn't matter anymore. The trap had been set. Dokja ordered the others to stand behind him. Heewon's voice carried a note of urgency, questioning why they weren't fleeing. The answer was clear. There was nowhere to go. The barrier ensured that. His mind raced. The fourth scenario hadn't even concluded, yet the catastrophe of the fifth was already unfolding before him. The meteorite at the center of it all wasn't a gift. It wasn't an opportunity. It was a disaster waiting to be unleashed. Depending on their size and color, meteorites contained either great treasures or unimaginable horrors. The one before him left no doubt. This was the kind that should never be hatched. Some prophets, still oblivious to the danger, reached out and touched the meteorite. A notification appeared before them, its message abrupt and alarming. The signs of the fifth main scenario had emerged. Confusion spread among them. Some read the message aloud, their voices filled with disbelief. Before they could process the situation, the surface of the meteorite cracked further, unleashing a blinding red light. The first to be touched by the glow was a prophet standing too close, his face frozen in awe. A second later, his head was gone. His body collapsed limply to the ground, lifeless like a discarded doll. Panic erupted. Shouts and screams filled the air as prophets stumbled backward, desperate to escape. Dokja's thoughts raced. The mistake was clear. They had been deceived by the meteorite's color. In Junghyuk's third regression, the one he found had also been bright red, but this wasn't the same. The realization settled deep in his gut, heavy with dread. He could only hope, no, pray, that it wasn't a major catastrophe. The meteorite cracked apart completely, and molten lava surged from within. The platform beneath their feet ignited, releasing an acrid stench that burned the throat. Heat engulfed the air, making it harder to breathe. The entire environment was shifting. Then the message appeared. Tier 5 Fire Dragon, Lesser Dragon Ignir has appeared. The remains of the meteorite shattered, and from its core, a creature emerged. A dragon species, pulled into this world through unnatural means. A deafening roar shook the entire station. Dokja knew what this meant. This was a catastrophe. A hidden scenario was about to begin. Heewon's gaze flickered with uncertainty. The question was clear in her expression, but the answer was worse than anything she could have expected. This entity wasn't meant to appear during the fourth scenario. Its presence was an anomaly, something that should have triggered immediate intervention. Then, in the midst of the chaos, sparks crackled through the air. A presence materialized, its form small, yet exuding an undeniable authority. This wasn't an ordinary dokkaebi like Baehyung. The mid-level dokkaebi observed the scene, his expression one of amused exasperation. The prophets had gone too far. His voice carried through the station, chiding the gathered humans for their recklessness. They had awakened a catastrophe before even completing their current scenario. Some among them were fortunate to have constellations who cared for their survival. Because of that, he couldn't let them perish. But that didn't mean he would lower the difficulty. Dokja's gaze remained locked on the dokkaebi, his mind analyzing every detail. A mid-level dokkaebi, and more importantly, he had stopped the lesser dragon from moving. Sungguk's frustration was evident, his voice rising in protest. The unfairness of the situation was clear. They hadn't even completed completed the fourth scenario, yet they were being forced into an impossible battle. The mid-level dokkaebi remained unaffected, finding amusement in their panic. There would be no adjustment to the difficulty, but to make things more entertaining, the scenario was altered. With a flick of its fingers, a message appeared before everyone, declaring the new conditions. The hidden scenario required them to either defeat the lesser dragon Ignir within the given time, or survive its relentless attacks. The consequence of failure was absolute death. Hyunsung hesitated, uncertain of what they needed to do. The presence of a tier 5 fire dragon made survival seem impossible. Dokja immediately dismissed any thoughts of direct confrontation. Even though Ignir was considered a minor catastrophe, its power far exceeded their abilities. Jung-hyuk Yu himself wouldn't have stood a chance in this situation, let alone a group of scattered survivors with no preparation. The dokkaebi showed no concern for their predicament. The scenario had begun, and there was no turning back. Flames erupted across the station. Dokja didn't waste a second, moving counterclockwise and signaling the others to follow. Heewon and Hyunsung reacted immediately, keeping pace with him. Minsub and Sungguk struggled slightly but still managed to move. Then the dragon's breath was unleashed. A torrent of fire spread through the space, consuming everything in its path. The prophets caught in the flames had no chance to escape. Their bodies disintegrated within moments, reduced to nothing but ash. Dokja assessed the situation with cold precision. They had barely managed to avoid the first attack, but this was only the beginning. The dragon's body tensed, its energy condensing. The next attack would be even worse. Ignir was preparing to unleash the flame of destruction. Time was running out. They needed to find a plate. Sungguk's confusion was evident, but there was no time to explain. Dokja shouted instructions, calling out specific numbers. The hidden piece activated, and a message appeared. Numerical footholds had emerged across the station. These footholds, when used correctly, could trigger absolute shield, but they required an exact number of people. No more, no less. If the limit was exceeded, the shield wouldn't activate. The prophets immediately recognized the footholds and the significance of the system message. What had begun as a cooperative effort quickly turned into chaos. Once friendly allies turned on each other, their weapons slicing through flesh. Blood splattered across the floor as they fought desperately for a place on the footholds. Dokja analyzed the situation with growing certainty. This wasn't just an unfortunate accident. Someone had orchestrated this. The disciples were the most likely culprits. The setup was too deliberate, too precise. They had likely used this method to eliminate the earlier renouncers, those who knew too much. It was a simple but effective strategy. Reducing the number of people who understood the future was always a tactical advantage. Minsub frantically searched the station, but there were no footholds in sight. Heewon also scanned the area, finding none nearby. Sungguk, however, finally spotted one, but it came with a cruel limitation. The foothold could hold only 4 people. Their group had 5. Before Dokja could process the implications, the dragon let out a deafening roar. Flame of destruction gathered in its throat, an overwhelming surge of fire ready to consume everything in its path. A grim solution crossed Dokja's mind. One person had to be sacrificed. Just as the thought formed, a voice cut through the chaos. Someone called out to him, urgency clear in their tone. Without hesitation, Dokja sprinted toward the source of the voice, shouting for the shield to be activated. The group stepped onto the foothold at the last second, and the absolute shield came to life. The dragon's firestorm erupted. Flames surged forward, engulfing everything in an unstoppable inferno. The heat was suffocating, an overwhelming force that twisted and melted the very foundation of the station. The shield held strong, deflecting the fire that would have otherwise reduced them to ash. A moment passed before Dokja exhaled, tension easing only slightly. They had survived, for now. His gaze shifted to the one who had called him. The face was unfamiliar, yet strangely confident. The prophet in front of him smirked despite the danger. Dokja studied him closely, his mind racing. The prophet introduced himself, reminding Dokja that they had spoken earlier about Asmodeus. But Dokja wasn't interested in that. He wanted to know who this person really was. Something was off. Dokja's memory was flawless when it came to the novel. The battle with the demon king Asmodeus had been a pivotal moment for Jung-hyuk Yu. It had taken place in a flashback scene, showing him being utterly crushed before he eventually triumphed. That scene didn't appear before episode 50. More precisely, the story of Asmodeus was revealed in episode 57. This prophet knew something he shouldn't. Dokja drew his sword without hesitation. His gaze remained locked on the prophet, his mind piecing together the truth. The eye of the sage had already confirmed it. This person was a disciple. The prophet hesitated before letting out a nervous laugh. His demeanor shifted as he introduced himself properly. He was the 1195th renouncer and the 5th disciple among the disciples. The trap was undeniable now. The scenario had already been altered, the butterfly effect spiraling out of control. The disciple acknowledged this, his voice calm despite the chaos, comparing the situation to a storm caused by too many butterflies. Meanwhile, the prophets who had failed to secure footholds were perishing in the flames, their bodies twisted and burned like moths caught in a wildfire. The hidden scenario's conditions were cruel, survived 10 consecutive attacks by securing footholds each time. 9 more remained. Sungguk's voice cut through the noise, but there was no time for hesitation. Dokja made it clear that they had to learn the attack patterns themselves. There would be no more guidance. From here on, survival depended on their ability to adapt. Dokja turned his attention back to the disciple. The timing of this reveal wasn't random. There had to be a reason. The disciple wanted something. The answer came with a grin. The disciple claimed that his intention was to save Dokja. It was a lie. A well-crafted one, but still a lie. Yet there was some truth in his words. The disciples didn't want Dokja to die here. His survival was necessary to fulfill a prophecy. Dokja immediately realized what that meant. The disciples had anticipated his presence. They had been expecting him. The disciple admitted that he had only learned of Dokja's involvement a few hours ago. The plan had to be altered in response, but the objective remained the same. Before the conversation could continue, the dragon moved again. The flame of destruction gathered in its throat, the air around it distorting from the sheer heat. The fire erupted, splitting Dokja and the disciple in opposite directions. There was no time to think. They both dashed toward the newly appeared footholds. The party members also moved, securing their places before the next wave of fire could consume them. However, the disciple took a different approach. Instead of finding an unoccupied foothold, he eliminated the person already standing on one. His blade cut through flesh without hesitation. The unfortunate prophet barely had time to react before their body collapsed, blood spilling onto the station floor. The disciple stepped over the corpse without a second thought, securing the foothold for himself and Dokja. His group had not planned on participating in the event today. That would have been the case if Dokja had not been there. Dokja listened, his expression unreadable. The disciple did not need to explain further. He already knew what was coming. Their goal was clear. They were going to hunt the lesser dragon. High above, the 5th grade fire dragon species, Ignir, roared as flames erupted from its body. The flames of destruction surged forward, scorching everything in its path. The absolute shield activated just in time, forming a barrier that blocked the incoming fire. A deafening roar echoed through the battlefield. 2 rounds had passed, yet already, more than 3/4 of the prophets had been eliminated. The difficulty was increasing, and now a hidden peace penalty had been triggered. The number of footholds appearing in the next round would be reduced. Hewan let out a frustrated sigh. The situation had worsened. Dokja turned his attention back to the disciple. Hunting the dragon. Did they truly believe they had enough power to accomplish that? But the disciple remained confident. They had made preparations. Dokja understood immediately. They had acquired blue ice pills. This rare medicine could only be obtained by hunting tier 7 elementals found in the western area. Consuming the pill allowed the user to emit ice energy for the next 30 minutes. If they had come this far, it meant they had already secured a supply of the pills. Even so, Dokja knew the truth. They would not be able to defeat the dragon on their own. The disciple laughed, his confidence unwavering. He had never claimed to be alone. Dokja's eyes scanned the battlefield, taking in the details. Among the gathered forces, 5 individuals were already exuding ice energy. Nearly half of their entire group had been assembled for this one hunt. Yet despite their numbers, Dokja remained unmoved. This much would not make a difference. The disciple had anticipated this response. That was why he had come to Dokja. If Dokja agreed to help, they would provide him with blue ice pills. But if he refused, then he and his companions would not leave this place alive. Dokja remained still, showing no visible reaction to the disciple's words. The threat against his allies barely seemed to faze him, yet a sharp calculation was already forming in his mind. The disciple's voice carried a quiet amusement. There was an insistence beneath the tone, pressing Dokja to reconsider. The headquarters had likely already fallen. A brief stillness followed, and the weight of the statement settled. The disciple continued, listing names. Naval Commander Jihei Lee, the child with strange abilities, and even one of the 10 evils, Gong Pildu. Prophecy had changed, yet Dokja had gathered formidable allies. If he lost them now, regression would be inevitable. More than that, the loss of Chungmuro itself would shift everything. The realization struck instantly. The enemy had anticipated this. The moment they learned he would be here, they had moved against Chungmuro. The disciple spoke with certainty. His group had already seized control of multiple stations. The scenario had been completed. Dokja processed the situation quickly. He understood the fundamental difference between a group with a king and one without. If the disciples had established dominance, dominance, then Chungmuro's fate was already sealed. His allies were likely holding their ground at the flagpole, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. It was a well-planned move. The disciples were unlike anything recorded in Ways of Survival. The identity of their leader remained the most pressing question. Dokja demanded to know who their king was and what renouncer number they held. The disciples' demeanor shifted. Their leader did not consider himself a mere renouncer. He was different. He had read the entire prophecy. He knew both Dokja's past and his future. The air grew heavy. The third attack was beginning. The fire dragon roared, its flames swelling forward once more. Without hesitation, Dokja moved. His decision was made. Without a word, he stepped off the foothold. The disciples' reaction was immediate. Panic broke through the carefully crafted composure as his gaze locked onto Dokja's form. Hewen's concern was unmistakable. Her eyes followed his movement, her expression tense. But Dokja remained unwavering. His command had been clear. No one was to leave their foothold no matter what happened. A faint smirk formed. The disciple had made a critical mistake. He had forgotten what Dokja's stigma was. The disciple's voice was filled with confusion as he called out, demanding Dokja to return. But Dokja had no intention of turning back. He had no fear of death. If he died, he could simply start over. But the same could not be said for the others. The disciple was merely an anomaly in this regression, an existence that might not even carry over to the next. Would he vanish with this world, or would he somehow remain? The answer was already in the prophecy. But Dokja knew the truth. No one else had read the novel to the very end. The idea of another reader who had reached the final chapter was impossible. The 5 apostles hesitated for only a moment before moving. They rushed forward, their intent clear. They had acted indifferent, pretending not to care, but in reality, they were just as trapped as everyone else. They were people who had stepped off and gotten caught in this scenario, and now they had no idea what fate awaited them in a world where the protagonist was no longer alive. The lesser dragon Ignir reared back, flames gathering in its throat. In that instant, Dokja pushed his body to the limit, every muscle tensing as he sprinted forward. His target was not the apostles, it was the dragon's legs. With a swift motion, he planted his flag into the flag holder of Anguk Station. A notification flickered to life. Anguk Station has been taken over. The message continued. Dokja has occupied 10 stations. The hidden scenario King's Road has been achieved. A choice appeared before him. Depending on the path he chose, he would gain a new king attribute. King of arrogance and hypocrisy, king of solitude and taste, king of no killing. Dokja didn't hesitate. Without even reading the options, he selected king of no killing. A new notification appeared. The attribute king of no killing has been obtained. That was enough. He had not wanted to go this far, but it was necessary to remove the people who stood in his way. Meanwhile, the prophets had finally noticed the flames erupting from the dragon. Realizing the danger, they turned and rushed back toward the footholds. But it was already too late. Dokja had made his move, knowing that his opponents had only one life to lose. They had been reckless, and now there was no turning back. The firestorm erupted, swallowing everything in its path. The scorching heat burned away any resistance, rendering all preparations useless. Even the effects of the ice pill could not shield them from the overwhelming flames. The inferno engulfed them, consuming their bodies in an instant. His companions cried out his name in horror, their voices lost in the roar of the fire. But it was too late. The flames surged forward, wrapping around him like a living force. The external enhanced suit struggled to withstand the unbearable heat, its durability plummeting with each passing second. His vision darkened, his body succumbing to the searing pain. The sensation of burning flesh spread through him, every nerve screaming, until everything went silent. Then, a sound broke through the void. A system message flickered into existence that you have died. For a moment, there was nothing but emptiness. Then, another message followed that the privilege of the King of No Killing is activated. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.